Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm Michael O'Hare. I'm Chair of TTT, and I'd like to welcome you all very warmly to our 9th event here at the ICC. And I'd like to pay a special welcome to Martin and to Deirdre, our ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, would you give them a round of applause? They took time out to be with us tonight, and we're very grateful. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'd also like to take the opportunity to introduce the hub of our driving force to deliver a note that she had posted privately today. And her name is Colette Mackin, and I'm sure you'll give her a big round of applause. She's going to read a note from Áras an Uachtaráin.
It is good that public discussion is taking place on the importance of integrated education as a groundbreaker for national understanding and future work between and within communities. As President of Ireland, may I congratulate Troubles, Tragedy and Trauma on organising today's important event. I regret that, due to diary commitments, I cannot be with you in person in Hammersmith. Sabina and I have been involved in supporting all of the early efforts for pluralist education on the island of Ireland, and are long-standing supporters of integrated education in Northern Ireland and its ability to positively transform communities and aid peace building. The Government of Ireland, through its Reconciliation Fund, has supported a number of projects focusing on integrated education for many years, including a number of projects undertaken by Troubles, Tragedy and Trauma. These projects were initiated in the firm belief that integrated education has the capacity to promote inter-community connections and work towards reducing segregation in Northern Ireland across all age groups. The late Baroness Blood, great trade unionist and forward thinker, and I discussed these issues at Áras an Uachtaráin. The extension of integrated education is both needed and overwhelmingly supported by parents. Segregation, we know from research, impacts disproportionately on poorer families. It is important that young people are recognised in the fullness of their being rather than by any narrow aspect of their lives. The role of education is central to peace building and to creating societies that are inclusive, tolerant and safe for all members of our communities. Young people must be encouraged to feel that they belong in each and every community. Integrated education has a vital contribution to make to a successful, inclusive and harmonious future in Northern Ireland. This is surely one of those matters on which we can all agree. I wish you well in what I anticipate will be a fruitful discussion today, and I wish the event every success. Guillaume gach rath agus bannacht a bhuair nuireachtaí ar son an phobal I Gudjinne agus ach go hairinte do daoine óga. Berbura is bannacht, Uachtaráin na Héireann. Go raibh míle maith agat.
Thank you for that, Colette. That was a very lovely note to get from the President, Michael D. Higgins. It's a pleasure now to introduce Ivan Gibbons, who is going to introduce the panel and tell you a bit about how we got this far. I was saying we've been doing it for about 9 years now. So I'd like you to give him a huge round of applause. It's Dr. Ivan Gibbons. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Integrated Education, a route to reconciliation. As Michael says, my name's Ivan Gibbons. I'm one of the trustees of Troubles, Tragedy and Trauma, which was founded in 2016 by Michael O'Hare. I'd like to welcome the Ambassador of Ireland, Martin Fraser, and his wife Deirdre to our event this evening. Thanks also to the Irish Cultural Centre for hosting the event, and thanks to the Department for Foreign Affairs Reconciliation Fund and the Embassy of Ireland for their support. Thanks to my fellow trustees and the team on TTT for organising the event, and to you, the audience, for your support. Just a brief word about the aims and objectives of Troubles, Tragedy and Trauma. It seeks to highlight Northern Ireland's Troubles legacy to a wider audience, particularly in Great Britain. It seeks to promote well-being for those affected by the Troubles, to encourage reconciliation between communities, and to research the needs of the victims who are part of the Irish immigrant community in Great Britain. And now to our speakers. The guest speakers on our panel this evening are Dr. Anne Murray-Cavanagh. 30 years ago, Anne was part of a group of Derry people who opened the Oak Grove Integrated Primary School and Oak Grove Integrated College. She became the first principal of Oak Grove Integrated Primary School, and she is currently chair of the Board of Governors of Oak Grove Integrated College. Anne received an honorary doctorate in education from Ulster University, and in 2015 an OBE for services to education. Father Brian Darcy is an Irish Passionist priest based in County Fermanagh. He is a writer, newspaper columnist, broadcaster, and preacher. Paul Caskey. Paul joined the Integrated Education Fund in Northern Ireland in 2000 as campaign manager. Alongside the late Baroness May Blood and the Integrated Education Fund Campaigning Council, he is responsible for leading the fundraising development campaign to help increase the growth of integrated schools in Northern Ireland. He received an OBE in 2021 for services to education in Northern Ireland. And finally, our chair tonight is Shelagh Fogarty, the award-winning radio and television broadcaster, currently on LBC Radio. She's also hosted Radio 5 Live's Breakfast Show and BBC Two's The Daily Politics. And so now it's over to you, Shelagh.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping to start with, which is just to let you know that we'll talk, just us here, for about 45 minutes or so. And then we'll have about a 15-minute break when you can, obviously, please yourselves. You can stay seated or go and get a drink. And then it will be questions from you to our panellists as well. And it was pointed out to me just half an hour, in a friendly way, I might add, that I'm the only person on the stage that doesn't have an OBE. So, you know, give it time. I'm aiming for Dame. We'll see. I'll have to do a lot better than this, than what I'm doing to become a Dame. Anyway, let's get cracking. Why don't I start just consequent, you know, who's sitting nearest to me. I'll put a general question out to all of you, which is just to bring us up to speed on how you see the sort of the state of, not the state of the nation, but the state of integrated education. Is it in rude health? Is it getting there? Has COVID changed the direction of travel?
Integrated education is, Anne, and with no the facts and figures better. I've this experience of it in Enniskillen and in Lagan and other places that have helped and worked out. I'm a great believer in integrated education, but we shouldn't put too big a burden on integrated education. Integrated education is one tool that may bring us together and will help to bring us together. One very effective tool. But, you know, politicians where people go back to their quangos at night and to their various places to live in will have a bigger influence on them than their education a lot of the time. And I find that all the time. And the difficulty is that with the falling influence of all the churches, particularly the Catholic Church across Ireland, that there's a melting pot at the moment, and sometimes we aim for the lowest possible thing rather than integration and positive integration. I mean, integration is not just people coming together to school. It's a way of
going back to something separate.
And going back to their homes that are separated politically, separated, so that there could be, their votes could be harvested better. I mean, that's the situation in Northern Ireland, and that's one of the biggest things in it. That is also changing because of the fluctuation in population and so forth. But you know, in olden days, and in my younger days, a long time ago, in Bethlehem, there was the Protestant churches had their school, and the Unionist education system was for a Protestant state for the Protestant people, and that was that. The Catholic one was it was a counter one of that, and it was almost like, you know, your Catholic education was how you stood up to the people who were trying to steal your heritage from you. And that's literally what it was. And I mean, for example, me in Enniskillen, we were not allowed to learn Irish at primary school. We were forbidden. It was forbidden to learn any Irish language at school. So, but then when I went to grammar school, the first thing I did was learn Irish. And being lovely little ecumenical people, on the bus coming home, we'd speak in Irish so that the Protestants wouldn't know what we were saying. And so my Irish was terrific at that time.
and filthy, I'm sure, as well, yeah.
Excuse me?
Oh, you know. I know what 13-year-old boys are like. Yeah.
Like 13-year-old
well,
girls.
And I'll come back to, if I can move on to Anne just for a moment, but I'm really keen to hear from you a bit further down the line about what you hear in the community post-COVID, what you see in the community post-COVID, because you were talking about it to me earlier. And just that state of the nation, state of integrated education, health update. Oh,
okay.
That's a bad omen, isn't it? Mic
Sorry
drop.
about that.
Mic drop.
So post-COVID...
It still works.
It still works, okay. So post-COVID, I mean, so many things have happened, you know, during COVID, and everything's changed.
Yeah.
You know, it's been awful for all of us, for community and for schools and so on. But for my overall perspective about, you know, at 70 schools are now, you know, there are 70 integrated schools now. For me, this is this is happening too slowly, because I would be very impatient.
Yeah. But do you have sympathy with what Father Brian was saying there about it can't all be on the schools?
Oh, absolutely and totally.
Yeah.
From my point of view, you know, it is one of the routes to bringing community together. And because I've been an educator, and it's in my blood, and I just realised it was 50 years ago this September, whenever I started to teach.
That's why you've got an OBE.
For long service, you're right. Because I've been involved since way back then, it's really I see the importance of working with children and staff and parents, because we are the people who make up society.
Yeah.
And so that would be where I'm coming from.
And again, I'm keen to hear more about what the children and the parents say to you about in those integrated schools, and in your conversations with them about it, what they say to you. So, Paul, your sense of things.
I think we're in a pretty good place at the minute. I think the story of integrated education has always been one of one by one, bit by bit, where communities and parents have come together to establish this choice. I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is that this is something that's driven from the bottom, from the community, from the grassroots. It's never been top down. We've never had the political support coming down from the top to enable it to happen. So I say to people, integrated education is not planned for. Why I'm optimistic...
Political and church, or just political?
Oh, there's lots of different reasons. I'm sure we'll come to that. But I think things are changing. Sheila, if you look back, since 2019, we have had 19 schools across Northern Ireland who have held a democratic ballot of their parents who voted in favour of becoming an integrated school. That was unheard of 5 or 6 years ago. Also, we have to acknowledge that last year legislation was passed at Stormont with the majority support of MLAs. Yes, the DUP tried to block it, and yes, the Ulster Unionist Party didn't support it. It got through. So that legislation, it's early days, but that forces the Department of Education in Northern Ireland to actually have a strategy and have a plan. So I think we're very optimistic for the future.
And how much does that, as things stand, how much does that strategy and plan genuinely involved consultation with parents and teachers, of course?
Well, the consultation at the moment is certainly through ourselves and the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education, the integrated schools, and also the integrated alumni as well. So we've got representation at the table. They've got to put a strategy together. We will hold them to that to make sure that it's robust and meaningful. And so let's see what happens certainly over the next 6 months.
I mean, for those of us who don't live in Northern Ireland and never have, but live in a country where there is increasingly a really wide array of schools, some of them more integrated than others. You know, there are still Catholic schools, but they're different than the Catholic schools that I went to, probably. There are Muslim schools, there are Jewish schools, there are state schools of all kinds of, you know, shapes and sizes. The fact that there isn't political support from the top for this seems strange, I think, to a lot of us, because it seems like such an obvious place to start with reconciliation. And as you've said, not the only one, but an obvious place to start with attempts at reconciliation. And even something less grand than that, just being together. Being together, sharing space, sharing experiences makes a huge difference where there's dispute, doesn't it? How would you define what that opposition is? Is it fear? Is it holding on to vested interests? What is it?
For me, it's about control and power. Okay. I mean, when Mo Mullen was alive, I shared many conversations with Mo, and Mo said, Paul, I'm going to put it to you very simply, that it is in the interests of the political parties, the main political parties, not to integrate our children, because they felt threatened by it. They felt threatened that their power base could be eroded if you bring people together. It might change how they think.
Mullen also, Paul,
yeah.
I spoke with Mullen quite a bit about it at that stage, and I made the heretical statement one day saying at least we have a good education system in here. She says you have for the privileged but not for anyone else, which was an absolute shocker to me. And of course she was right.
Absolutely.
She was right about it. Yeah. And she had a great insight into that. She had a great insight.
Tell me why she said that. What was going wrong?
Well, the people who go to grammar schools and so forth, no matter what type of or secondary school, if they have that education, but the poorer areas have poorer education by and large.
Right.
And the poorer education is much poorer than it is in other countries. Our good education is probably better than most other countries, or as good, but it's a very divided place. And I think it's very, and Anne and Paul will understand this, you know, clearly. It's theoretical, and it is good to have theories, it's good to have dreams, it's good to have plans, it is. But it also, we have got to get inside people's minds to change people's minds, parents and younger. But one of my dangers is on the ground at the moment is that there are a fair number of young people who are actually further apart than they've ever been. And
which seems extraordinary.
It does seem extraordinary. And the danger is they don't remember what the rest of us lived through. And that's a heck of a danger. I said earlier in a joke sort of way, and please don't quote me too seriously on this, but you know, as well as integrated education, it would be wonderful if they did away with Celtic and Rangers. Completely. Because it is I mean, you have to be careful what town you drive.
The great divide.
It's if there's a Celtic and Rangers match on, you have to be careful what town you go through, what time you go through it, what area of the town you go through it.
Literally.
Oh, yeah. You know, now that's not Protestant Catholic because none of them have been in church for about 20 years.
But you saying that young people, some young people, potentially have forgotten or might forget the horrors that you went through, that their parents and grandparents went through, and so settle into positions that really aren't going to help with coming together and reconciliation.
I meet it every day.
How do you tackle that?
I meet it every day.
How do you tackle that?
The only way you can tackle it is have strong relationships with them. Get them playing sport. One of the biggest dangers in Northern Ireland as well is there's only one community plays Gaelic. Gaelic football is a hugely important thing, and Gaelic culture, which it should be, and rightly, and it must be respected. Because it's doing it. I mean, if it weren't for the GAA throughout Ireland, but particularly in Northern Ireland, you'd have a desperately sad place because there's nobody else doing anything for the youth. By and large,
in terms of sport,
in terms of for the youth, other sports clubs are doing things, but not to the same organisational ability on the ground as GAA. Yet, I'm kind of from County Fermanagh. There's about 56,000 people in Fermanagh, but there's not a single Protestant in Fermanagh who plays Gaelic football. Not a single Protestant in Fermanagh is a member of a Gaelic football team. Yet, I'm glad to say that every soccer team and every rugby team is populated entirely, almost 50% and maybe more, with Catholics. So what they're not getting there, they're getting there. And the point, you see, we had I'm sorry to do this, but these things, just to explain things a little bit. When Arlene Foster was the First Minister, she being a Fermanagh woman like myself, Fermanagh got to a rare occasion. We've got to 4 Ulster-finals in 184 years. So you can understand what that is.
Big day.
A big day. And it was held in Clonus across the border. And the big thing is, would Arlene Foster go to support her native county?
Yeah.
And I met Arlene for a cup of coffee one day in the town, as I just met her. And I said, are you going? And she said, should I? I said, I think you should go, if you can. I don't want you to be getting into trouble with your party, but you should go. And come in after the soldier song has been played. And take them back. Yeah. Take your place, all right. So be held up in traffic, you know. Coming from Outram Sea is easy enough to be held up in traffic, to be honest. And so she did come, and then we had a chat about it again, and she said, you know, I actually don't have a problem with the national anthem in Clonus, because it's in County Monaghan, because it's across the border, and that is the national anthem of that place. But I cannot go to a GAA match in Fermanagh because it is not, I don't think, that is my national anthem in Northern Ireland. Mine is God Save the Queen.
And I think that gives...
Now, I'm saying that just to settle...
It illustrates well, I think, how finely and, from my perspective, I must say, oddly, the lines are drawn. Not odd when you know the history of the place, but they're drawn so strangely to people from the outside, I think.
Yes.
But it's changing, Sheila. I was going to give you a bit of encouragement on that front. So it was about 3 years ago. Brian mentioned Lagan College. Lagan College became the first non-Catholic school to win a GAA Ulster Schools Cup final. I grant you it was a minor trophy. It wasn't one of the top ones. And I think it was 2 years ago, the final was competed by 2 integrated colleges, Drumragh and Lagan.
Drumragh and Omagh.
And that's breaking that mould, you know, and it's sending a message out. And better than that, the team at Lagan College, I know for a fact, was a majority Protestant team. They had 3 boys in the team who were brilliant GAA players, and they had to make the team up with people who never played Gaelic football in their lives, but they were good soccer players, and they brought them in.
And it worked.
I wonder would they go to their club afterwards? That's
well,
the
East
crucial
Belfast GAA are breaking the mold as well.
And Anne, you were talking, Chris, earlier on about power bases and control. Power is something that's at the centre of your understanding of what's holding this back.
Yeah, well, yeah.
To the degree that it's held back.
Well, and I think it is. I mean, I think people operate on what we have, we hold. So if you were, you know, running Catholic schools, that's your power base. And if you were running Protestant schools, somebody was going to take it away. Or they were going to take a bit of you away, then if you got the two sets of people in the middle. And so that takes a long time, you know, for some to happen. Like, it's 40 years since the beginning of integrated education. So this is very slow, long, slow trajectory. And I always had a problem that we did our best to separate youngsters by religion, by sex, by ability. But any way we could do it, we did it. And we, you know, made a great job of doing it like that, just keeping them all, putting them all in their own separate things so that they didn't have to learn from one another. And yet you bring them into you bring them into one school and they're going to learn. Now, you've got to also teach them. If you're bringing people from the different communities, you just don't bring them all in and say, look at them all, how happy they are, and they know everything about anybody else.
Well, explain a bit about your early experience as a teacher, because you've seen that in real time, haven't you? You were the...
Yeah, well,
you were the new arrival.
Yeah, that was slightly different. This was before integrated education.
But you saw the reaction.
In 1973, I came back to Derry, Londonderry, to teach. And there was a small building that was nearby, and I said to somebody, oh, what is that building there? And they said, that's a wee Protestant school, and it's taken in Catholics. And I said, gosh, that's a really interesting idea. That's a great idea. I think I'll just walk in there and see what happens. So I went in and I met the principal, Jeff Starrett, an inspirational guy. he'd been in the RAF. He was from across the border in Lifford. And we had a conversation, and he said, so what about you? What are you doing yourself? I said, well, I'm looking for a job. And he said, well, why don't you, there's jobs here, why don't you apply here? I intended to work in a Catholic grammar school, you know, just for smart girls. Instead, I went into a wee Protestant primary school with boys and girls who were only aged 5 to 11. And I learnt so much in the time that I was there. I was a shock to the school because they were all Protestant teachers, and they were a shock to me.
And what was the balance of pupils? You said they were taking in Catholics.
When I went in, it was about, maybe about, if even a third maybe, were Catholics who had started to go there, but they didn't have any Catholic teachers, so I ended up then doing something that I didn't expect to do, which was taking them all through confirmation and First Communion and so on. And learning along the way. And I remember Jeff Starrett, who was the principal, I wanted to do an assembly, and I like a nice, you know, a good assembly. And I said to him, right, and I want to say the Our Father as well. Are you ready? And he said, yeah, what do you want? I said, right, I'm going to say it, and you're going to tell me what's wrong with it, okay? So I said the Our Father and pinned him up against the wall. And then he said, right, it's just who or which. And I said, well, can I go in and let the children do that? And he said, great, that's grand, go. But it was, you know, that's how separate we were. Yeah. I didn't even know if you could even do that, you know. Yeah. And so then, as we went on, and that was my basis, like I had a great grounding in that, because it dawned on me then, whenever I eventually went into Oak Grove Primary School in 1991 as the founding principal, how important it was that whenever you bring people in who have been taught separately how to become teachers. We have a Protestant training college, and we have a Catholic one, just for the crack. And then the Queen's University,
really easy,
Queen's University will do both, you know, but we keep them kind of quite separate. And that we have 18-year-olds that we don't trust to be smart and empathetic enough.
And that's present-day training you're describing.
That's still that. We still do that, you know. So we are slow learners. But we're getting there, and I think, you know, we are moving on.
And that question of preparing children for the sacraments, and how much of a sensitivity is that in integrated schools, where Catholic schools might say, well, hang on, how many of those are making the Holy Communion or the confirmation, or how many of them are learning about the sacraments? How good is the religious education? Is that always a sensitivity?
From my experience, it depends on school by school. I think there's been a lot of work done looking at, you know, I've been to integrated primary school, say Phoenix and Cookstown, where the 4 main churches were there the day it opened, and they were there the day they celebrated their 10th anniversary. I've been to other schools in other parishes who may have more difficult challenges within it. And of course, the schools want the parish priest to come in. The children and the families want to see
difficult challenges because of the community it's in, the school.
In the community, it may be the community, or it could be the attitude of that particular priest, or the area that the diocese that they're operating in. So it's a mixed picture. It's too simplistic, and I think if you look at the history of integrated education, people will say, oh, the Catholic Church is opposed to it. But actually, as we've seen recently, the Protestant churches are no fans of it either.
Much more opposed to it. Yeah.
So, you know, but
you would say much more, would you?
No. In the beginning, I think you agree with Paul. In the beginning, I mean, it's just on the practical level again. You know, I remember giving a talk in Lagan College way back in its early days, and the Bishop of Down and Conor wrote to me and told me not to do it again. Yeah. Of course, I did it.
Just right.
Because I knew it was right. That's why I did it. It wasn't, you know. And I remember in another parish I went to, and the parish priest came out to me and he said, Brian, you're here now in this area. A few things I don't want you to do. Number one, I do not want you going near the integrated school for anything. And 2 other things that I was not supposed to do. So, as rector of the monastery, I said, well, thank you for telling me that, but I won't be imposing on the integrated school, but if they ask me to do anything, I'll be the first in to do it, because that's what Christ would want me to do.
Good for you.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah.
You know, and that time, children from the integrated education going to make the First Communion, it was a horrendous experience for them, because it was a separate day, and they were quiet. They were like something.
A separate day from the Catholic
Yes.
school kids.
It was as if they had COVID.
More lines drawn. Yeah.
It was COVID confirmation, you know. And I fought it as best I could, and I said, this is not the right thing to do. You know, the parents have a right to choose their children. Isn't it fantastic they want the sacraments? Why don't we do our best to give it to them?
Yes, yeah.
And I think that is slowly seeping back into again as the Catholic Church loses power anyway.
Yeah, but I also think that for me, I just saw opportunity, opportunity knocks. So the choir is now made up of Protestants and Catholics to go and sing at the First Communion, and then their parents want to hear the choir, so they're coming as well.
Exactly.
And now they have seen First Communion and Confirmation, and then the Catholic parents are there anyway because it's their wee darlings that are there. So, you know, you can, and then
You're crafty, aren't you? You're crafty.
No. And then, of course, we'd use then the Harvest Festival. So
Yes.
we'd all go down then to the Church of Ireland Church, and then all the Catholic parents would come down as well. And then, you know, and they have said, lots of lovely wee church, isn't it? I've never been in one of those before, you know. Until it becomes their normal, that they don't raise their eyebrows anymore when you say, and then we're doing this other, you know.
And realise that they didn't keel over the second they spoke to somebody from a different community.
And you know, people just love to become involved in all of that with their children are now there, and their children are friends. My daughter wanted to become a Methodist because she loved the music, and especially the hymns, and she was like really thought, she said, what do you think?
Father Brian, you're not going to like this. I learned the Old Testament from a bunch of Methodists in Liverpool.
As long as you learned it, I don't
Yeah,
care
I
who you learned it.
did.
See, Anne, your daughter wanted to become a Methodist.
I remember years later reflecting on it with my mum and
Sheila,
dad.
my
I said,
son got into the car one day. This is the highlights of integrated
Go on.
education. So we got into the car one day, and he turned around to my wife, and he says, I'm thinking of becoming a Catholic. I says, what? Where does that come from? And he says, well, see that First Holy Communion party the other day? He got 250 quid. So, but, you know, the sad reality is I was 18 years of age before I stepped inside a chapel, where he is growing up in totally comfortable. Doesn't matter what you are,
when you said,
who
you mean a
are.
Catholic chapel?
A Catholic chapel.
Yeah.
When Her Majesty the Queen came to Enniskillen, we were all there, and we had worked hard at this thing of going from our churches trying to integrate, particularly after '87 and the terrible bomb in Enniskillen.
Yes,
so we worked very hard. We changed back to Enniskillen at that time. We worked very, very hard at overcoming things in it, and eventually she came over, and she came from St. McGarten's across the street to St. Michael's, and I was chatting to her that day, and she said, "This is a big day for me, you know." I said, "Why?" It's the first Catholic church I've been in here.
The Queen?
Queen had never been in a Catholic church in Ireland before.
That's a new story, ladies and gentlemen.
And
That's
she had-
amazing.
and she was delighted with herself.
Of course she was.
We weren't going to make anything of that.
No.
You know, it's just, you know, but she was delighted that another thing had been broken down.
Yeah. Well, you could see her delight during, this is a quick detour, but that when she made that tour of Ireland, she didn't stop, apart from the serious moments where she had to be very serious. She was grinning from ear to ear the whole time.
She was, because she was getting into horses. She loved the horses.
No. I have it on good authority that it very much mattered to her. To get
No,
there.
I know.
Maybe because of the horse.
Because of the horses, yes. Who
But
did she
anyway,
ring?
who did
It wasn't
she- yeah,
English
yeah,
jockeys
yeah.
she rang
No,
about
it
horses. It was Irish jockeys
What's his
she
name?
rang about.
JP.
And
name?
JP, yeah.
JP
From
McManus.
No, not JP McManus, the jockey.
McCoy, AP McCoy.
AP.
McCoy, yeah. I think she was a Charlie Swan woman myself.
Eh?
I think she was a Charlie Swan
Well,
woman.
Charlie she had a direct line to Charlie. She did. Oh, she did. She did.
She knew her horses.
She thought he was the only one who knew anything about horses.
So did my mother.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's interesting, those observations where you as an individual have noticed those moments in your life. Yours was early in school, yours was, as a teacher, I mean, yours was your son saying that, and then you remembering. And in my conversation this evening before we came on stage, I remembered and reflected on two friends of mine that I met in my first year at uni, so we were 18 kids really, and they were both from Coleraine. And a few months probably into our time at college, they asked me if they could come to Mass with me, and it was all, you know. But it shows how deeply into the bones it gets, doesn't it, that sense of separation. And it's a hard one thing to break down.
It's awful, and and the churches are to blame, politicians are to blame.
Families. Families sometimes.
Families. I mean, I've really had to do weddings secretly because of cross-community weddings.
How
Secretly.
recently?
As recently as 2 years ago. Now, one happened to come from a particular fundamentalist group of people. And I was worried about doing a wedding because it was taking the person out of such an incredible... by the fact that she was marrying a Catholic, she was actually cutting herself off from
her family.
everything. And previous to that, a boy and a girl had come to me. They wanted to get married. They had a child, and they didn't know where to get it baptized. And I myself and the minister did a joint baptism, and I said, God can sort it out. At that stage, it was just baptism.
That's the truth of it, though.
That's the truth of it,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
But unfortunately, when it came to the day of the baptism, the father of the child was told that if he went to that baptism, the farm was gone. And he didn't come to the baptism.
Told that by his family.
He chose the farm over his child. And what a day I had that day. Now, I don't really blame him to an extent. The cubs, he was in an awful way. The cub's a young boy, by the way. So we had a terrible... We still, it breaks my heart to see this division. Where it comes out of. I've worked all my life hard. And one of the things, where did I get that from? I've often been asked that. Why are you,
Why do we all think we're so different?
why do we so different? But I grew up in a small little village in Benilech in County Fermanagh. We were the only Catholic family in the village. My father was the man who ran the Gaelic Club. Willie Thornton, his next door neighbour, ran the Orange Lodge. And they were born on the same day, in the same house. One on the 12th, not the same day, one the same year. My father was born on the 12th of July. And Dick Thornton was born on the 15th of August.
Right.
On the same house, in the same year, which meant that neither of them could ever have a birthday in their life. Because if they were seen out celebrating on the 12th of July, what the hell are you celebrating that for? And Dick Thornton the same year celebrating on the 15th, what are you doing?
But all the music they missed from the opposition.
Exactly. But on the 12th of July, my mother got me good. We had a small wee tin house with a roof in it and all the rest. So we had nothing really. We could throw the turf down the chimney and the spuds were growing them in the garden, and we had plenty of both, and that's all you needed. But my mother, on the 12th of July, gathered all her Protestant neighbours' children into our house. She fed them, kept them, minded them the whole day of the 12th of July so that the parents could go and celebrate the 12th in peace. That was long before communism, long before integrated education, long before anything. What I'm trying to say is all of these things are wonderful, and we do need it, but you need human decency as well.
But back to the politicians, to make the change that you're seeking to make, you need political support, don't you, to change those structures?
It's coming. I mean, I mentioned earlier on about the passing of the Integrated Education Act. If you followed that through from when it was first laid in front of the Assembly until it was passed, you could see the journey that some of the politicians were on. I remember distinctly, and to his shame, a former Education Minister, John O'Dowd, who attacked integrated education on the Assembly floor, said the schools were about paying homage to the Queen. There was no Gaelic culture, there was no Gaelic sports. Now, he's since publicly apologised.
Integrated education,
Yes.
integrated schools.
And this is a former Education Minister, but John did apologise for the remarks. He said they were wrong and they were made in the heat of the moment. So Sinn Féin went from objecting to the Integrated Education Bill, as it was then, to actually supporting the passing of it. Also, I'll be totally upfront with the SDLP as well, because many people thought, they'll never back this. They're too close to the church, they'll never back this. They backed it.
Yeah.
Now,
And
the
over
party would have torn itself apart
How
internally.
long did that change take?
Oh, the SDLP, I think the
In the
SDLP have been on a journey for several years now. Particularly, being honest, the younger elements coming through the party who would have seen it. And I mean, the SDLP youth were always championing integrated education that I can remember over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And that's now filtering through to the party. And that was a huge change, Sheila, to get that through.
And can I ask you, and any of you feel free to comment on this, Obviously, from my perspective as a daily broadcaster, and we talk about Brexit, we talk about the protocol, and has any of that shaken people's confidence in integrating more in education? Because they've perhaps gone, the sense that Northern Ireland is being made separate from wider Britain, or the wider UK, and so everyone back in their old positions almost. Has that happened in the communities, or to a degree at all?
Well, for me, I come from a unionist tradition, whatever that's supposed to mean, but they worry me the most. That's what, I mean, my blood used to say to me, the problem with unionism, it has a bogeyman around every corner. Nationalists have one, and it's usually Britain and the English. Whereas, and I think there's a lot of truth in that, and I fear for the community that I was born up in and grew up in. I always took the view that if the majority, I mean, simple democracy, if the majority of people in Northern Ireland, as the Good Friday Agreement underlined, want to remain the United Kingdom, they shall remain the principle of consent. For me, the principle of consent went out the window with Brexit, because the majority of people in Northern Ireland wanted to remain. And I find that very hard to take. And, it suits us 1 minute, but when you feel something else, well, the hell with that.
Wasn't that because elsewhere in the UK, other regions that also didn't vote for Brexit, wouldn't have had the same choice to opt out?
I'm at a serious level, and this is me just thinking out loud now, and if it's offensive, I don't mean it to be offensive to anybody, but I think what we at this stage, and I've thought about this a lot recently, I'm coming near the end of my days, and you look back on 53 years as a priest, and you say to yourself, what did you do for anyone? Did you bring people together? Did you introduce a loving Christ to them? Do people understand anything about a more compassionate God because you existed? Or because of the way you talked? It's a big conscience thing for me when I go to bed at night to see that. But what I really want to say that I can see the disintegration of a lot, but I actually don't see the integration of that much. Disintegration should lead to transformation of some description. Maybe it's too soon to see the transformation. I worry about Northern Ireland at the moment.
What do you see, when you say you see disintegration a lot, what do you see disintegrating?
COVID has decided that, that people coming together has disintegrated. Old people have been put aside as if they're totally useless. Totally useless. And old people feel that. I'm one of them now, and I'd be a fairly active old person, overactive old person some of the time. But old people are just, they feel they're useless in society. We're only holding everybody back. Just die. I've done more funerals this 12 months than ever in my entire life. And a great deal of it is for the reason that people had no reason to live themselves. And secondly, they could not get medical attention and still cannot get medical attention. And so they're dying, dying at an enormous rate.
Well, the excess death rate is high at the moment.
It's very high. And I don't think we have even begun to fashion the disintegration of our society and values and certainties as a result of COVID.
Yeah.
Now, it may have been a time in history, it may have been going to change anyway. I don't know that. I would need a further study than I could do. But in just by observation of life, you will see that, the churches are at best half full or half empty. All churches, by the way, not just one church, they're all churches. I'm chaplain to the dance band lads, as you know, and the bands are finding it very difficult.
To get people to come out.
People can't come back out again for entertainment. They're just not coming out. But as I explained to the guys, 15,000 of your fans have died anyway in 3 years. Because that's the age group that's the age group that died. And medical systems have broken down, particularly in Northern Ireland. Medical system is and we have no government. And we can do nothing. It is a crying shame. I'm anti-Brexit for that reason myself.
And the picture you paint there is I mean, in order, not just education, but in order for post-COVID resurgence of community, you have to come together, you have to have that structure of politics, of healthcare, of education.
Disintegration may be bad in itself, but disintegration, handled rightly, could be the greatest gift.
Revival.
The greatest gift we have.
Yeah.
It could be the greatest gift we have, because people will, in their disintegration,
That's
be
broken,
able
what comes
to
next.
choose what's important.
Yeah. Well, queen of opportunity, queen of seeing an opportunity. Tell me, where's the opportunity there?
Well, I still think the opportunity is around our young people. Like that's where I'm coming from.
Old people gone.
You and me just have to hang in there for
Right,
a while,
okay.
I think.
Guide them.
Yeah.
And let them guide you as well.
And that's important, because they need to hear our wisdom.
Yes.
OBE.
But Obi-Wan Kenobi. So for me, again, education is what this is all about. I mean, I'm talking about education, yes, I'm talking about, school, education in schools, but also in the community. And there's a lot of work going on in community with people out there helping one another. And I think that's great how people, stood up and recognised what the difficulty was, for example, during COVID, and went out and helped people out and delivered. And
we all saw new connections being made. It's about making sure they remain, isn't it?
Even though we all became separate, and then finally people went out and they did all these different things, and so that whole community thing out there is really important. And then the young people coming through would be in the middle of all that, would see all of that, and they're not afraid then to go out to different communities and so on in Northern Ireland. They're not just going to feed the people over there, because that's a nice Protestant community and they're all Catholics over there, so we'll not bother. That's not happening. Again, it's people coming together as community and going out to do that. So I still think that's back down to our young people, and I have great faith in our young people.
You do, and you see that happening still, do you?
Yes.
It needs to, but it needs to be supported, doesn't it? And as
Of
you
course
said,
it
if there
does,
isn't government, not just by government, because the best things often happen from the ground up, don't they? And your thoughts on that sense of disintegration?
Well, I think I agree with Anne in terms I would put a lot of faith in the young people. Fortunately, I see myself at that over the age of 50, that I'm disconnected from what really matters to them. And I mean, the conversations I have, my eldest boy's 19 now at university, and he's not interested in some of the stuff, the old flags issues and the politics in Northern Ireland. He's interested in it, but it's not a barrier to him. I mean, he's more interested in climate change, he's more interested in same-sex marriage and other social issues than he is about the protocol. I doubt many people in Northern Ireland could even spell it, never mind know what it is. What is being presented is this big stumbling block. I know where you're coming from, Brian, in terms of the elderly and separation with COVID. My mother turned 90 this year and was a regular church attender. And church was a big part of her social life. I tell you, not that she's overly religious, but she loved the coffee mornings. She loved the whole social life.
3 weeks.
Yeah, that's it. But that broke down for her because my mum doesn't have Wi-Fi. And when they put the church services online, it was no use to her because she never had nothing to watch it on. So, it's okay. I agree. I think the elderly have been left behind in society in lots of different ways.
It's interesting.
But I'm optimistic for the future with the young people.
When I can't remember which lockdown it was, but when we were allowed a maximum of 6 people in our house at a certain point.
Except you're in the Prime Minister's house.
Then you can have as many as you like.
Downing Street,
But
okay,
we
we'll not talk about that.
had a mass. Honestly, it was the nicest mass I ever went to. We had a mass. A lovely priest called Father Ravi from Runcorn in Liverpool. A mass in my mother's front room, with Father Ravi, me, my brother, my sister-in-law, and another brother. And it was just so we could have had another one in there. We didn't, and it was just fantastic. We had all the windows open and the front door was open for ventilation and all this nonsense. Well, it wasn't nonsense, but we were freezing, but we were fine. And it was just lovely, absolutely lovely. But afterwards, we were talking all together. The priest stayed as well, and he made the point that people like my mum, and my mum had a great deal of support around her because she had a big family, but lots of people didn't. Lots of elderly people didn't. Yes. And he said he was told he couldn't go in to see them. He couldn't give them communion, and and that was a not just a physical loss, but a spiritual loss as well, wasn't it, for people, and to maintain their sense of themselves. Whereas we could do that with Mum because we could get online and sit in front of a mass with a priest she recognised, and it was massive. It really was massive. That.
Could I ask Anne, and you don't mind if I ask a question?
Of course not.
Go ahead.
Could I ask Anne, do you notice, or is it just me, that our best brains, when they go out of Ireland, and particularly out of Northern Ireland, to university, don't come back? I mean, that's a major problem. Yes. A major problem from education, if we educate them just to leave. Now, they have a right to travel, but we are losing such,
Absolutely.
we are losing such wonderful leaders, potential business leaders, potential society leaders, the educated, the best educated, the guys with, I used to say in my job, the priest, when we were not allowed to marry, the fellows with get up and go got up and went. What does that say for the rest of us? But you know,
You're doing all right, Brian. You're doing all right.
But you know, the church lost its leaders, and now is suffering for it. I see it in my own community, and parents from every background, unionists and nationalists, and know nothing at all. They say, why can't we? What can we do to get them back? I think that's a valid question.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, and a lot of them do go.
Yes.
But I'm also pleased that a lot of them do come back, and I'm pleased with the ones that do come back, and because they want to be back there, and they want to make change in Northern Ireland, and they know what they're coming back to. I mean, they don't think they're not going on their holidays when they're coming back. They know exactly what's back there, but they also know the importance of being back there in order for it to change.
Is there any lead?
There are some, yes, but not enough, I think, Anne.
Yeah.
Is there any political? It doesn't have to just be a political voice, but are there any political voices asking them back in the way that Mary Robinson asked the wider Irish diaspora? You know, she had the little light on in the window, didn't she? And Norris looked her on. She said, you know, home is still here for you, and people did go back.
Well, in Northern Ireland, it's hard to do that. Even in the south, I'm not talking about the south since we're talking about Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
But in Northern Ireland, it's hard to do that. Bringing them back to what? A place where there's no government, a place where people can't even. We have a hospital in Enniskillen about to close because there's not a government or a minister. There's no minister of health. There's no minister for education.
And
so, I mean, you're bringing them back to a quagmire. And so that's what I'm trying to say is integrated education. We have to be realistic about it. Integrated education is wonderful. Shared education is wonderful. Cross-community relationships, necessary all the time. Interdenominational worship, absolutely necessary. All of those are necessary. But you need a social structure around it that is of the same, and that is not going to be
that enables it.
A row about bonfires, or a row about nationalists, or a row about singing up the Ra or something like that. Do you know what I mean? These awful things that go on.
Chris,
And back to Celtic and Rangers again.
Well, just, I mean, Brian's right. I mean, they did a survey, it sounds boring, we talk about surveys and research, but a group called Pivotal in Northern Ireland did work on this last year. And one of the key reasons why young people said they were leaving, they were well educated. These were kids who are coming out of grammar school.
Yes, of course.
Top grades. You know, and it wasn't just because they thought they could go to London or go to other places and earn more money or get a better job.
It was to get away.
They had to get away.
Get away.
They were sick and tired of the politics. And that was the reasons that they stated. It's not me saying it. That's what the young people
and that's a fact. And that's exactly
Of course,
right.
we want to attract people back home. You know, I was one of the people that came away to work in London and spent 6-7 years in London. I went home and I have no regrets. And I know anybody who has come back to Northern Ireland having left it, they find it a brilliant experience. Because of the education, although it's divided, the quality of the education, the affordability of housing and so forth. And it's been a good experience.
Post Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah. Post Good Friday Agreement. But we need more of it.
Yeah, we do.
Need much more of it.
Well, we need to be careful. It's not going to be post Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah.
There are those who are working very hard on that at this moment. That the 25th celebration of the Good Friday Agreement will be a wake for the Good Friday Agreement. There are sadly too many working on that.
Yeah.
Well, we have got to shout against it.
I think for now, before we put questions to you in 15-20 minutes or so, or you put questions to us, I should say, let's take a break. And I think there's some very serious food for thought there at the end of our discussion, but cause for hope as well, as ever. Why you have to travel, hopefully, don't you?
No, absolutely, yeah.
But thank you to our panellists. David.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you can get a drink outside if you wish and reconvene in about 15 minutes and then questions for 15 minutes or so. Okay? Thank you. There is a gentleman with a roving microphone who's going to bring it to whichever brave soul wants to put their hand up first. Oh my goodness, there you go. Right, question for one or all of the panellists, but not for me, I'm sitting this bit out. Oh, microphone coming. Hang on. Gentleman at the front here on...
Second seat.
Apologies, I didn't see... Okay, sorry, I didn't see you, apologies for that. Go first.
Let me give a little bit of context before I get to my question, if that's okay.
Of course.
I'm one of those who left. I came to London in '82, despairing of the future over there. Yet I watched with great admiration and renewed hope what Anne and her colleagues, several of whom are in the front row, are doing on the ground in education in Derry to make a better society. And there are, to address Father Darcy's point, there are lots of others working in different spheres of the arts and youth to do work likewise. My own daughter now lives in Derry and with her husband works in mental health and addiction to address what we might call the lasting impacts of troubles, trauma. Yet with all these good people, progress is very slow and it's still resisted by old vested interests and power. So my question, maybe it's to Anne and Paul in particular, I'm not sure. What can be done to make the changes systemic rather than the efforts of a few good men and women? And what can we do here in London and beyond London to help in that effort?
Do you want to go?
You want to go?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
And I will.
totally agree with the sentiment because I think the problem that we have is structural. So we divide children, in the case of education, we divide children at the age of 4. And then we spend, I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, and then we go out with a begging bowl, trying to raise money to bring them all back together again. And there is a peace and rec industry in Northern Ireland, people who specialise in bringing people together. And yet they're very silent when it comes to actually dealing with the structural division. That is going to take political effort. It's not easy. If it was easy, we'd have got there. But how you dismantle those structures is very, very difficult. I mentioned earlier on the legislation. People say, I've heard it for 20 years. Why are you only at 6% or 7% or 8%? And the answer is always the same, but this is a grassroots bottom-up movement. This isn't a top-down approach. So we've got to get it top-down. We've got to get an assembly back, and we've got to make changes. And as I said earlier, we got the legislation through last year. Let's get it enacted, let's get it implemented, and let's start changing things. And I don't like to say this, but I will, is that there's an economic benefit too. I always say to people, I don't do what I do, and I'm sure educators don't do what they do to save people money or anything like it. You do it because you want to educate children and give them a better future. But there is an economic benefit. We have, right across Northern Ireland, we have villages with 2 schools, sometimes more than 2 schools, and both of them are deemed by the Department of Education to be unsustainable. Maybe 40 children in one and 50 children in another. And the way things are going at the moment, I'd rather close them both than actually come with a village solution. So, unfortunately, I'm now starting to talk the language of people who are involved in economics and finance, but you have to bring them on board too. If you can show there's an economic edge to what we're trying to do in terms of integration, then maybe some other people will listen. I don't know whether that answers it, but...
Sorry, that's simple. What would you want us who don't live in Northern Ireland to do to help?
The easiest one to say is come back and say we need to raise awareness of these issues. We need more people to be aware of it. There's a lot of people aren't aware. Even in Northern Ireland, there's a lot of people aren't aware. So we need people who can raise these issues in the press, in the media, on social media, and help build the momentum up.
Well, and a
That's
good,
an
a
easy
good
thing
example
to
of
do.
how that worked was Pete Thompson with me, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I hadn't heard of the Integrated Education Fund, and then about, gosh, probably 12 years ago now, something like that, 12, 15 years, an old university pal of mine from Coleraine invited me to go to a fundraising event, and that was the first I'd heard. And then subsequent to that, I had Baroness Blood on my programs, and so that's how I can, obviously, with the job that I do. But I think it's a really great question you ask about how, not just in London, but in any community, in the world of education, in the world of reconciliation, you can. That's a really great question. Yeah. You wanted to say something as well, Anne? Did you on that?
No, I agree.
Okay. And this gentleman.
Sorry, because all I'm going to do is go back and say.
Sorry, go on.
All I'm going to do is that, so from my point of view, we have 70 integrated schools in Northern Ireland now. I think it took too long for us to get to 70, and I just need to, I feel it's really important that we work on the ground to have more of that so that more people have access to that.
And the gentleman there that I think I stole the microphone from earlier, which is so your turn.
That's all right, dear. Now, Father Brian had alluded to this at the beginning of the discussion and at the end, this whole business about, shall we say, the worries about post-Good Friday agreement and how, shall we say, elements of the youth were getting a wee bit more tribal these days. Now, should we say, over here, we see this sort of thing, people rabble-rousing in the Telegraph and the newsletter and so on and so forth. I was curious as to how the panel saw this work, shall we say, showing itself on the ground, and what was being done to mitigate.
I missed
The first
a
half.
lot of your
Yeah.
part of your question.
He was saying that you expressed concern that we might be moving into a post Good Friday agreement age, and you talked about some young people, retaking those old positions, and you worry about.
You mentioned something about newspapers. I missed that.
Yes, shall we say, the people making shall we say, the rumbling of boots in shall we say, on one side, saying about, shall we say, drawing away from the GFA, and how that's being received by the youth.
But you're talking about the press stirring the pot, basically, negatively.
That's how I see it from picking up things on my news feed. I'm just wondering how it's being worked. Sorry, thank you. I didn't want to deafen people. How it's being worked. How that's manifesting itself on the ground, and what people are doing to counteract. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are you thinking of I wasn't sure whether you mentioned Telegraph, and Telegraph could mean Belfast Telegraph or Daily Telegraph. Belfast Telegraph. That's what I thought. Because the other Telegraph could do it as well sometimes. But yes, I don't think it can. One of the hobbies that we do in Ireland is blame everything on the press, and the press, being a journalist for 53 years. Now, we're to blame for a lot. We are to blame for a lot, mostly for not asking the right questions. And for taking an easy answer when we should be looking for something else. And that goes across the board to church, to school, to education, to everything else. I think the press can be blamed, but basically my view is that the press writes something that they think people will buy, intellectually and financially. Press don't lead, or rarely lead. Press and politicians play the game to the people that support them. So I don't think you're going to look for it in the press. There'll be exceptions. There are exceptions. There are strong exceptions who analyse things differently. And we have a couple of good programmes. We have probably one good programme on BBC Radio Ulster, one which rabble-rouses and one which discusses. Both needed, I think. And there are other ones as well. But the quality of debate is awful. The quality of debate is awful. I'm a great believer in the philosophy that it's not enough to listen. You have actually got to hear. And there's a vast difference between listening and hearing. I don't think most political discussions I get, especially in Ireland, North and South, is that people don't even listen because they don't want to hear. And if they are listening, they're only saying, how can I put that fella flat in his face with an argument? It's only to counteract an argument. They never actually listen to what is being said. And if we don't listen, we won't hear. And if we won't hear, it'll never change. And I suppose I learned that in a different level, dealing with my own abuse as a child and dealing with abuse ever since with people who come to me in abuse. And it's a very hard thing to do to listen. And it's a beautiful thing to do to hear. But once a person feels heard, they actually begin to heal. And it's the same in politics. We have not developed the art. I'll give it to you in a short sentence. I've gone on too long. A short sentence is this. You will hear the most wonderful, fluent vocabularies and beauty and aspirations and dreams about what we should do in the future of Northern Ireland. And 99% of those people, when they get a pencil in their hand in the booth, will vote tribally the way they always did. And that's where you have to get the difference. A system of politics and election, let them have a strong mind, but there has got to be a place where we can listen and think. And down south they're getting these 100 people together and spending days listening to what the 100 people want and their suggestion legislation after having spent weekends scientifically picking out people's brains. That's where we have to begin there. The reason you may think I'm feeling despair. I don't feel despair because there's an amazing amount of wonderful, good people about. The problem is that within church and in state, the good people are not the rulers. The good people can't get, their voice isn't, their voice
because of the tribal structures.
Because of tribal structures. I mean, I think, without wanting to be reflective, I think here in Britain, England and Wales particularly, I think the level of debate in my lifetime has diminished beyond belief. I mean, I used to listen to Question Time on the radio in the evenings. I listened to the day programme for years. I listened to Evan Davis in the afternoon and the evening programme. And Evan Davis, I think, is trying the hardest of them to get real people really speaking. But the level of debate is awful. It's shouting, screaming, and it's coming from a bigoted, prejudiced background. And what happens is the quiet voice says, feck yous, I'm away.
Anne, did you want to say something?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go to the lady here.
Yeah, can I just add to that what you've said about the South and how groups of people from the community are coming together and doing that. So that's actually happening in Northern Ireland now.
Citizens' assembly type structures.
It's sort of that, and I know because there's a group based out of Derry, Londonderry, who get 30 people, 30 different people to discuss 5 different areas of society and bring them together for exactly that whole discussion so that their voices can be heard. And I think that's as well very hopeful.
It's lovely. But is the next bit done at Anne, which I think is the essential bit of the Citizen Assembly down south, it's brought to government, and government has to say yes or no.
Well, you need a functioning government for that to happen.
But you need a functioning government for that.
If I may,
I'm just saying, this has started there.
Yes.
Didn't even get as far as a functioning government.
Well, there isn't one, is there? That's the problem. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lady here, I think, with a microphone in her hand. Is that right? Yes. Yeah.
Okay. My name's Kathy. I'm also from Northern Ireland, and I've also left Northern Ireland, but I'm always going home. And you mentioned about talking to the parents of sort of through the integration of education. these are also young people that you're talking to. These parents can't be very old, and so they've got children. So what are the negatives and the positives that you find, and how can you influence the integration and influence the parents of whatever community they come from?
That's a great question. And you're right, it's got positives and negatives. I'll start off with what appears to be a negative, which was the parent who arrived in the primary school very early on and came through the door. And as she came through the front door, a police officer in full riot gear came out of the primary 3 class. And she was from a Republican background, and the school wasn't open very long. So the first I knew about this was whenever my door practically came off its hinges as she came in and said, "What the
F?
Thank you for that.
F for father.
Do you think what the F do you think you're doing?" And so I'm sitting there wondering which thing is she talking about. So I said, "Oh, just sit down and we'll kind of have a chat." And so anyway, I discovered what she was talking about, and I said, "Oh, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'll deal with that, and then I'll get back to you." So when she calmed down off, she went, "That was fine." And then I went then to get the police officer who was in full riot gear then, and I brought him in, and then I said to him, "What do you think you're doing?" So he and I had a conversation about what we were having. The P3s were talking to people who help us in the community. So it could have been the dentist and the doctor, everything. And this was a police officer, right? Kind of about road safety and how to keep yourself safe and everything. And he thought that the children would really appreciate, the whole
Batman.
Which would have been fine, if he was a Power Ranger, but it didn't work too well anywhere. So we went on from there. So I had a discussion then with him and also with the police, because that's part of the thing, and then brought the parent in again to explain all of that. And it's really important, when we set up integrated schools, we are bringing people from separate communities, and the earlier that we acknowledge that, the better it is, because we are looking at parents and we're looking at children and we're looking at teachers and staff who have not been together. So they don't know, for example, how to make one another sandwiches, because Protestants and Catholics make them in 2 different ways. Just in case you didn't know, I want you to point. That was one of our early experiences. It was very important to us. But there's work in all of those areas, and that work is crucial to what we do. And so you have children who come from different sides as well, and two 7-year-olds come in and they're both crying, and I'm saying, so tell me all about it. What happened? He called me a Protestant. And I said, "Oh, right, and are you a Protestant?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, and why did you call him a Protestant? Are you a Protestant?" "No." "What are you?" "I'm a Catholic." "Okay." And why did you call him that? And I said, "Just because he was fighting with me." And I said, "Oh, did you want to hurt his feelings?" And we did all of that. And then I said, and what does that say in the front of your jersey there? It says Grove Integrated Primary School. I said, "What's that big word there? I can't remember what that means." And then he tells me then, "I think it's about Protestants and Catholics." I said, "Well, is it about being kind to one another?" "Yeah," and we go through. So, that level, which sounds very, very basic, but it's very, very important that they get the opportunity to do that. And that's at that level.
Because it's in those real moments where the real feelings happen, isn't it?
The real moments. Yeah. And like children who are very young, 4-year-olds coming into primary 1, they've already gone through whatever they've gone through, first of all in the nursery. And one says to the other, "Well, where are you from?" And he says, "I'm from Derry, what about you?" And she says, "I'm from Londonderry." "Is that what you mean?" No, primary 1, and we have to sit down and say, "Well, isn't this great? Look at this, and the number of names we have for the place we come from. Let's have a..." And then share that with parents. The other thing then about parents is, for their induction when they come in, I would have had up a big slideshow that showed all the murals, the Protestant murals, the Catholic murals, all of those. And then say to explain to parents that the importance of them knowing that we have an overt curriculum and not a hidden curriculum. And we have got to start recognising the other. And where else are we going to get a chance to do that? You know, so that's why your parent thing is very, very important. Yeah. And then teachers are separate again.
Thank you. There's a...
I was going to say, just quickly
Briefly,
on what
yeah.
Anne's saying, is actually the way to get this, how difficult it is. I think some people think of integrated education as some sort of middle class, woolly liberal, must be alliance, party, mixed marriage type viewpoint. Actually, the work that goes on within the schools is really, really challenging. Anne's given an example about primary level. One quick story at post-primary level. So not that long ago, we were going through the decade of centenaries. Yeah, the formation of Northern Ireland, Easter Rising, everything like that. So we have a post-primary school that sits in southwest Belfast called Malone College. And Malone Integrated College has about 65% of the children on free school meals. So these are kids coming from deprived communities, from the Shankill, from the west of the city, and some from the south. So some of the children were talking in school one day about wanting to wear the Easter lily. And the principal, Maura Thompson, who comes from a Republican background, and Maura herself went, oh jeez, what am I going to do? These kids are going to, they're going to walk outside the school to start wearing the Easter lily. I'm going to be on the BBC, they're going to be asking me questions, what do I do? We happened to be in with her at the time, and my colleague with me, Paula, said, have you asked your young people? I said, what do you mean? She said, get your student council together, put the question to them, see what they think. Okay. So anyway, the young people got together. She got a knock on the principal's door. This wee lad came in with the other one. The wee lad was from the Shankill Road. He said, we made a decision, miss. And what did you decide? He says, we decided it's okay. Because I'll be wearing the poppy. If they want to wear the Easter lily, that's fine by us. And she went, oh, Jesus, what am I going to do? So when they went down, she says, on the BBC, you're going to be on the phone. He says, well, what do I do if they ring? He says, hang on a minute, miss. If the BBC ring you, I'll speak to them. And I'll explain it's our decision. The young people have decided this. Now, as it happens, it wasn't an issue. Nobody did come in wearing the Easter lily. There was no big fuss, no big issues. But that's not easy work.
It shows the kids can handle it. It shows the kids can handle the discussion.
Young people can handle the conversation better than us.
I want to get as many voices as I can before we leave. The gentleman over here, and I'll come back to you.
Sorry, just a very quick question. As it's the 25th anniversary this year, I'm just wondering, do you think there'll be any acceleration in the number of schools will be integrated as a result of the 25th anniversary and the extra focus and effort that will be in Northern Ireland? Will that help in any way, do you think?
I hope so. I mean, I was talking to Anne earlier, we're actually inundated at the moment with schools that are queuing up in terms of exploring integrated status and taking parental ballots. So I said earlier, 19 in the last 3 years have gone through the ballot process. There's no sign of that slowing down. In fact, it's only going up. So, and I think the Good Friday Agreement will help refocus minds.
Hope springs eternal, as they say.
I actually think that integrated education, shared integration, cross education, the coming together of various educations, particularly integrated education, it's now time for them to stand up and speak. It's the absolute time to it, because, not to do with Good Friday Agreement or anything else, but because church-run schools are now becoming so much a problem for church people. For example, in Dublin, Dermot Martin, the Archbishop, when he was there, he said, look, those who want to run their own school, run their own school. He gave the parents, and the Catholic Church doesn't want to be running schools if the people don't want them to be running schools. There will be a certain amount, naturally, as there will be a certain amount of everyone wanting their own particular schools. But I think now is the time. When I was saying earlier, there's a disintegration. That could look upon it, as I said, that it's a negative thing. Well, for every crisis, the crisis is an opportunity. And the opportunity is to say, let's restructure our society. Let's restructure our education. And most of all, will we get rid of the damn ghettos that are causing the problem? I mean, if I'm born in a certain part of Enniskillen, I'm going to be a Catholic. I might never go near the church, but I'm going to be a Catholic. If I'm born in the Shankill Road, I'm not even going to be baptised, but I'll be a Protestant. And that's the fact of the matter. That is the fact of the matter.
Still,
I'm going to be a Protestant. So, and where they come from, That's what makes that. And the whole thing at the moment is, there's, church attendance in Catholics, which would be the highest church attendance, would be in urban areas 10-12%.
So the grip is being loosened anyway by the people.
It's the people are choosing. Now, I think the structure of churches is not speaking to the needs of people. I also think the structures of politics is not speaking. The structures are not speaking to the needs of the people. Yeah. And I think the structures of medicine are certainly not helping people to live in a healthy way. I would actually say today that education is pretty much the same. Not quite as bad as the other, but it's in need of getting into itself and saying, what are we about? Is it about getting points exams? Is it about educating the greatest capitalist in the world? Or is it about integrating somebody who happens to be the human being,
in the society they live in.
human being that God wanted?
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem over here as well. What's the education for? This lady here has been waiting patiently.
Thank you. I'm thinking back to two previous conferences that TTT had here. One was on women in politics in Northern Ireland, and the other one was on the future of unionism in Northern Ireland. And education came up in both of those. And what came through from particularly the one about the future of unionism, and May Blood was sitting on this stage talking about it. And what she was concerned about was the number of people, young people who get on, do really well in schools in Northern Ireland, leave and don't come back. And she said that this is affecting the unionist community much more than the nationalist community, and that the unionist community therefore didn't have the role models and the education role models that they needed, and the jobs that they used to go follow their fathers into they weren't there anymore. And the nationalist community had a much more, they put much more importance on education, and that was happening. And that in a lot of the schools in Belfast, the schools are becoming integrated, but they're not integrated education. No, there isn't integrated education going on in the schools, but the schools, a lot of Catholics, middle-class Catholics, are now sending their children to schools that hitherto had been seen as Protestant schools. So integration is happening now, but it's mainly in middle-class areas. In that there are a lot more Catholics going to what was previously Protestant schools, or state schools, really. Although the state schools in Northern Ireland were always seen as Protestant schools, as Father Brian said, because they were seen as set up in order to keep to put forward the idea of a Protestant state and educate them for that. So there are two kinds of integrated education happening in Northern Ireland at the moment. So what's come across to me is that what you're doing is very different from what's happening, I think, in the schools where there are more Catholics.
Are you describing sort of accidental integration and properly thought out integration?
And actually class-based. Class-based. Because in the working class areas, this isn't happening.
Well, let's let some thoughts. Yeah.
And I would wonder, is this about grammar school education? Yeah. So if you have so grammar school education is the other way we divide people. Whenever we get our children to the age of 10 or 11, we tell them they're either stupid or smart. And the idea of that, I hate the idea of that so much. But it's being used, so the grammar school system then that will divide children in that way is then being used then by middle-class parents who can afford to get their children through the 11 plus, because if you have enough money, you can buy a tutor, and then you buy a tutor, and then you go, and then there's space in the Protestant grammar school, and that's where you go. that's they know what they're doing, and that's what they're interested in. The fact that they might be sitting beside a Protestant will have nothing to do with the general education. From my point of view, that wouldn't be like that. If I was in one of those places, it would be very different, and I would get the sack, because they wouldn't be doing the integration part of it, which I think would be really, really crucial.
So what do we do about those schools? Because we're talking about
Well,
disadvantaged
they're on a
areas.
journey. I know exactly the schools we're talking about. I mean, well, let's name one. Well, let's name BRA, which tears itself apart every year, because when they do their prize giving, it's a tradition of the school that God Save the Queen is played at every prize giving. 40 to 50% of the students and their parents sit down, and 40 to 50% stand up. Now, this happened in Queen's University 30, 40 years ago. I mean, we were going through this. That's what BRA is going through at the moment.
Yeah.
Methodist College, great school, great traditions, grammar
Rugby.
school education. 14 members of its board of governors appointed by the Methodist Church. So, you know, I'm very careful to put down, I mean, wherever degree, where it's, people call it contact theory, wherever young people can mix, wherever they can connect with one each other, wherever they integrate, whatever it be, through sport, through education, is to be applauded. So I'm not standing here criticising everybody who isn't a perfect integrated school, far from it. But there are facts that need to be faced up to, and if your governance of a school is made up by the Protestant churches only, or by the Catholic Church only, then to me that needs to be addressed. Please don't go around calling yourself an integrated school when the culture and ethos of that school is very much one part of the community. And if your kids go there, you fit in to that culture.
Let me ask you for a thought on all of that. You had something to say about the poorer areas in their schools.
Yeah, it was more or less the point that I was saying. I come back to this old thing again, and I'm sorry to come back to it, but I really have been struggling against it all my life. You know, a ghetto is a hard place to integrate anything in. And ghettos don't integrate. And yet, you know, what's even worse, I mean, I've spent time in Ardoyne and other places in a ghetto. I've worked with people from East Belfast very closely in it. And the ghetto mentality, it's a horrible cross to carry, because you can go to Australia and you'll discover your mind is still a ghetto. The world's against you. My vision is small. You know, there's a wickedness and anger, a bitterness that comes from it. And it was the people who gerrymandered the political situation. That's how that happened. They were all put into areas where they could have, you know, as in the beginning it was 2 unionists to 1 nationalist. That's how they used to do it in Derry, and we all marched in 1969 for 1 man, 1 vote. Jesus, sounds so awful.
Any woman. Yeah.
And never mind a woman. Yeah. But that's. I mean, we did. I marked and got my head hit for it. That's the excuse. But I think that we need. All I'm pleading for is that not to let this opportunity for a radical rewriting of society. Don't let it slip.
Across the board.
Across the board, because you see, people. I talk to people, and people talk to me, and they say after COVID, "I wonder will I ever get back to the way it was?" And I say, "I hope to Christ not." That's what we don't want. Do you know what I mean? We don't want to go back to what it was. Take a crisis as an opportunity. Crisis is an opportunity to be different.
Right. 2 more questions. This gentleman, and then I think we'll. Oh, sorry. I think just some guidance on time. If you're happy for a 3rd question, I'm happy to do it. Yeah? Okay, we'll have 3 more. Okay. You're in. Go on.
Thank you. I've really valued all the contributions tonight. I've really enjoyed it. My question is primarily on the back of this gentleman's question earlier around the up-and-coming 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. For context, I represent a charity that was formed on the back of the Integrated Education Fund. It's called the Integrated Alumni. We're a network of past pupils, primarily from integrated schools. But we're now not just past pupils, we're supporters, we're advocates of integrated education more generally in Northern Ireland. And we have, I think our membership is probably 50-50 in terms of those that were born post-Good Friday Agreement and those that were born pre-Good Friday Agreement. And I find it very interesting, the narrative that's coming out from some of our members at the minute about how we mark this celebration. Because if you look at the language that was in the Good Friday Agreement, it was to facilitate the development of integrated education. And coming back to your point earlier on, where a lot of people, especially if you're under the age of 30, you think that things should be moving at a more rapid pace. And especially when we're looking at young people today and looking to the hopes and dreams and ambitions for the future, we think we should be moving at a more radical pace. So my question is more about how do we frame, maybe as a membership from those that have also attended integrated education, how do we frame the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement? Is this a celebration, or is this a bit more of a protest?
And if you could keep your answers relatively brief so I can get through to the other two people. Go ahead.
It's a tough question. I'm not sure how I would answer it, Michael. I think there's a lot to celebrate in terms of what the Good Friday Agreement set out to do. But, I mean, how much of it never got implemented? You know, it's about implementation. There's no point we have an agreement that says, you said about integrated education, also talked about shared housing, also talked about a Bill of Rights. Where are all these things? These things were left behind because when the politicos got in charge, they had a different agenda.
Yeah.
These were the things that they didn't really want to. Unionists, my background, they want to get the decommissioning sorted out, get the provost off the stage, do all this. You know, other people wanted to get prisoners out and do all that sort of stuff. But the stuff when it came down, I sound like my blood here, but she always said this, anything in the Good Friday Agreement that's about the community.
Yes, absolutely.
Is left behind.
Is left behind.
Yeah.
So there's lots to celebrate the fact that we got that agreement over the line, but so much of it hasn't been done. So it's work to be finished. You know?
So I think acknowledgement of what did happen is really important, but also to take the opportunity to highlight all the things that we haven't done anything about. Yeah. Is really important as well.
I think so. I think that's I'd agree entirely with that. But I think there's a poverty of leadership.
Yeah, totally.
And we can't get over that. Yeah. And why is there a poverty of leadership? Essentially, there's a poverty of leadership because the political system doesn't want leaders, doesn't encourage leaders. It only invites people into it who are capable of something less than being leaders. The party political system, I mean, I've sat and screamed at televisions when I saw what happened in America, what happened here in England, what happened, you know, all over.
Westminster politics lacks leadership as well.
Well, of course it does.
Big time.
Time. And once Westminster politics lacks leadership, nothing will be done about Northern Ireland. And it was the same in the south. There was a time there, the Celtic Tiger burst and everybody was trying to survive, and there was nothing done. Fine Gael did absolutely nothing for a long time. They are now changing on the northern issue. And the very best of politicians died, and no leaders of the same quality replaced them. And so all of those things are very important. So what you can do from over here is encourage leaders, encourage debate over here, that it is their responsibility what is happening over with us.
Yeah.
If unionism wants to be, and it has a perfect right to be, a part of the union, well, we can't just be a part of the union that gets the crumbs from the master's table. Well, we deserve more than that.
I have to say a big part of that has to be British people, English people in particular, with no connections to Ireland, know nothing about Irish history. It comes through on my phone-ins all the time. Anyone who knows anything, even a bit, it's because they have Irish connections. And the same isn't true in reverse. You know, Irish people know about
everything.
British history. Anyway, that's just my observation.
Does the panel feel that the South could do more?
Yes.
In terms of cross-border reaching out to break down suspicions and entrenched positions. So, for example, I don't mean, the inland waterways between Enniskillen and Shannon. That's just over the border. But, I could envision, for example, a busload of Protestant unionists coming down to Shankill to Kerry on some kind of cross-border and vice versa. I never meet Protestant unionists anywhere in the south except in Dublin, in Lansdowne Road, every 2 years. And I don't know anybody from the south that goes north for a holiday, a weekend or whatever. So is there anything else that the people, the government or the institutions in the south could be doing to reach out?
It's a hobby horse of mine. I think we should be doing far more. You're talking about the people in England not knowing much about the North. The people in the South know nothing about the North either.
Why would they want to?
Well, perhaps, but then if that's the case, then we've all failed.
Yeah.
If that is the case, we've all failed.
No,
I mean, I spent 25 years working in Dublin, and it was in the real, 70s when there was murders, hundreds. I mean, many was 300 or something more than in 1972, and my own I had 3 first cousins murdered in it. From it, Enniskillen happened. The bombing in Enniskillen was in the school that I went to. That was where I went to school, where that bomb went off. Gordon Wilson, one of my loveliest friends, and Joan still is, elderly now, always lovely friends. And there was always goodness in it. But they would say to me in Dublin, you're all the same up there. That's all I ever
Tired
got.
of it.
These are all the same up there. These are all the same. And the border was, I talked about ghettos mentality. The border mentality is, apart from those who made a living out of smuggling, who used the border the proper way. Apart from that, the border was very effective. There's a border in people's minds that's an incredibly difficult thing to move. And I think, for example, if the British government and the Irish government got together and said, we're going to promote Ireland as a tourist place together. We're actually going to promote Ireland as a place of industry together. But we can't do that now because of Brexit. And Brexit has been, I hope if there are pro-Brexit people in the House, tonight, I apologise. You have a perfect right to do that, but I think we should also know the consequences of Brexit. The consequences of Brexit have made life extraordinarily difficult because it has raised the issue of a border that had disappeared.
Can I stand as the unionist in the panel?
Go on.
Stand up?
Go for it.
Can I stand up for the Irish government? Because I actually I think they've done a really good job over the last 10, 15, 20 years in terms of their reaching out. And I mean that sincerely. I think they've put so much more effort in to understanding what goes on within unionism, what goes on, particularly loyalist areas, ghettos that Brian's talking about, where these groups have been speaking to and engaging with the Irish government for a long time. And I'm going to bring it down to parties and drink and socialising. They know how to throw a good party in the Irish Embassy. They know how to throw a good party in Dublin, and they know how to throw a good party in Belfast. And I'm serious, it brings people together. You can have conversations like we're having tonight. Yeah. The Northern Ireland office is slowly, very slowly catching up.
And the drinks are already
they're playing catch up for 20 years, and that's their missed opportunity.
I'm losing track of who's next. This gentleman, I think. And I think we will have to leave it there.
With everything now coming to a head with the 25-year anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, we have a Prime Minister in Westminster who is held hostage by the ERG and doesn't really know how to show any leadership, in my opinion, or even understand the issues here. How important do you see that it remains a pro-American, having someone like Biden in there, pro-Good Friday Agreement President, a pro-Good Friday Agreement Congress? We've only got so much of this generation in American politics that understands or is vested or even cares about this. How important is it to keep that going as long as it can, to keep breaking these stalemates moving forward while we have that lack of leadership and poverty of leadership, as you said?
The Clinton flame, the Clinton flame.
I think it's very important to have that because that's a voice that's very important in the world coming from the USA. So I think it's really important that we have as much interest and support for the future of Northern Ireland from somebody who's in office, because the UK are kind of, well, no, sorry, I think England, the government in the UK has got too many other things that are their agenda.
To quote Jeremy Corbyn, present but not involved.
Present but not involved, I'll take it. So I think they have just got too much on their plate. Why would they even want to have anything to do with us? If we would just disappear on a spaceship, they'd be delighted. But we do need somebody with international clout to give us some kind of backing so that we can move forward, because we can't stay in the state that we're in currently, I think.
Any thoughts? Any final?
Yeah. Finally, I agree with Anne entirely, and there's another part of me, I wonder what you think of this, Anne. There's another part of me says,
I'm listening.
Isn't it bloody well time we grew up and solved our own problems?
Yes. And there's that.
You know, isn't that also
Yes.
something to
totally.
be said? Why are we always waiting for the guy, and I was going to say the white horse, that might not be the right one there, to come in and solve our problems? It's not going to happen. Ukraine, Africa, world crisis, oil, there are so many hotspots across the world that from a financial, economical point of view, are far more important than Northern Ireland. And eventually, leadership of governments in the world today only get involved when there's economies involved. And so you have a problem with China, and if China was, the financial situation of the world, with China owning so much of the world and depending then the rest of the world to buy its products, that's an incredibly difficult financial thing to keep. We don't know what the results of COVID are going to be, how many countries are actually bankrupt if they were allowed to think it. So that is that there. I think that I think we're going to have to get a change of leadership in the main parties in Northern Ireland, or a change of attitude among the leadership. I mean, we can't go on with the DUP or Sinn Féin the next time deciding that they can pull out of a government and the whole thing collapses. That is absolutely bloody ridiculous.
And a change of leadership in
That
Westminster.
is bloody ridiculous.
Well, listen, I think we should leave it there. It's getting on. It's fascinating to listen both to your questions and to your hello.
There's one little thing that as an encouragement to Anne here and to Paul. I was lucky enough to be awarded an OBE for cross-community work. You will too, Shelagh. But when I was receiving the OBE, I didn't know what the hell to be doing, and my two sisters came over with me, and none of us are used to running around palaces and royalty. Far from it, we were reared. But they were very nice to us. And William was doing a thing. So I thought there would be nothing said, just do a hang thing around your head, and you say, who the hell is he? Why is he getting it? What's a Roman collar doing in a place like this? But he said, you've worked very hard for cross-community relationship, Brian. I said, I've done something. He said, well, don't you think integrated education is going to be the answer? And I said, well, it has a part to play, but ghettos have too. I think that has to be looked on. But I said we should encourage people to do that. He said, I think you're right, I think we have to encourage people to come together from a young age, whether it's in education or not. Would you agree with that?
I had a word with him.
Yeah,
before I got
you were up before him, weren't you?
You were the same bit.
On that note, to Paul, to Anne, and to Father Brian, and the Queen of Query, I call her.
The Queen of what?
Query.
Query.
Shelagh Fogarty, thank you so much. You're on behalf of the trustees and all the group that make TTT work, I want to thank you most sincerely for being here yet again, and thank you for continuing to support TTT. Good night and God bless. Bye-bye.